Like, you got to show me a grateful termite, Jim.
All I can say
Anyway,
is to each their own. The Grateful
uh,
Termite Hill is the one I'm going to die on, Andrew.
hey, James.
James, did you call me James?
I called you James.
That's okay. There's only one of me. So
Yeah.
why would it be James?
Yeah, exactly.
That's fair.
My son is named James.
Yeah, there you go. You got two James in your life. It can be hard to
Jimmy.
decide when you're a James, if you want to be a Jim, a Jimmy, or a James.
I always wondered how you get to Jim from
Mm.
James.
Mm.
I always wondered that. And then,
That is a funny one.
But then the more time you spend in the UK, the more you realize the reason I don't get it is because our accent is different.
That is really interesting.
But if you have a different way of saying the A sound, it can
Yeah, it can make more
almost
sense.
sound like a kind of I.
That is interesting.
And like,
Yeah.
and yeah, I can sort of see how you could get there now, where I never understood it before.
There are a few nicknames in Spanish that never made sense to me. Like from Jesus, short for Jesus is Chucho. And I was like, what is going on there?
What's up with that? Explain that to me.
Jose became Pepe and stuff like that. I never understood that until I lived in Mexico for a couple of years and heard little kids saying those names. And it sounded like the nickname version of those names. And I went, oh, that's where it comes from.
So it comes from like a mispronunciation.
Yeah, it's like a little
In
kid
a different-
maybe not in all cases, but at least in those cases, it was like, oh yeah, when a little kid tries to say Jesus, it often comes out kind of like Chucho, and I can see how that happens now.
Huh. Yeah. Anyways, there you go. Great episode, Jim.
Bye. No, we could tie that into gracenotes. It's like I look at a terluith and I go, how on earth did we go from a G gracenote to a terluith?
Yeah.
You're going to try to convince me that the embellishment system started with these simple things and got to these wildly different things? It's hard
Have
to
we
imagine.
ever talked about this? Have we ever talked about this on the pod before?
I think it came up actually a little bit when we were talking through how to simplify tunes, maybe, where it was like, look, if you see a doubling, break that down to, it starts with a grace note. I think maybe that's where it came up, but it was only very briefly and in passing. So I dare say we'd be safe diving into it.
Yeah. Obviously, what I have to offer today would not be an exact representation, but it's sometimes entertaining and informative to think about why do we play technique the way we do. You ever notice if you learn the recorder, right? If you learn the recorder, anything you play on the high hand, I could be wrong about this, having never played the recorder. Okay. What you should talk about on your podcast is
things you don't know.
But anything you play on the high hand on a recorder and the bottom hand will remain off the holes, I think.
If it's not the recorder, certainly there are other instruments that are, I think that's called an open fingering system, where like it just all comes off as you go up.
Yeah.
I believe Spanish gaita, Galician gaita is like that, which is
really?
even closer to pipes. I think so. Penny whistle tends to be that way. So whether it's the recorder, I feel like maybe recorder actually is a closed system like the bagpipes, but there are instruments like that. Yeah.
But we don't do that. Anything we play on the high hand, bottom hand returns to a home position where we're playing low A. And what's up with that? Why do we play low A on the home position?
Yeah.
And not low G or B or something?
Oh, I had not even thought about that, Andrew, because it's like what I had thought about is why can't I just leave my fingers off? Because that's the intuitive thing that any person
or the other
does.
question that a beginner might ask is like, why does it really matter at all?
Yeah, that comes up a lot. If you've ever taught somebody,
the
like,
classic one
why?
is the classic one is clumsy lover.
Yeah,
that's I don't
so
know
much
about you.
easier.
I don't know about you, but my first stab at that went like this.
Yep.
But that's illegal.
Yeah,
Jim.
You can't do that.
Even
It's
though,
against them rules.
And could you tell, I mean, if someone's listening to the podcast, no way. There's no way you could tell that I was radically, quote unquote, false fingering.
Especially on practice chanter, but probably even on Highland pipes. You could probably get away with that.
Yeah, you could definitely get away with it. I mean, considering that most people, their drones aren't really in tune anyway, like why are you fussed about a ever so slightly out of tune high A? And I think sometimes a false note, quote unquote false note, they do sound yucky. And they do alter the tuning fairly significantly, which is a good reason to have a consistent standard for fingerings. Right? Yeah. Because then, because you want and need in the perfect world the tuning to be the same each time you play that note.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if sometimes I play an open C and sometimes I play a closed C, like that would be an example, especially with certain reed chanter combinations. And C actually gives you a significantly different sounding C, both in pitch and possibly in the quality of the note.
Yeah.
Right. That would be a case where, okay, we got to make sure we always play our C's the same way. But in other cases, like obviously shouldn't really matter that much. Mm-hmm. Does it actually really matter? I'm not quite sure. But the answer is yes, it matters. But the reason why I think for me takes a little bit more imagination and thought process and perspective.
Why do we do these things that we do?
Yeah. And it leads me back to the caveman days, Jim.
Yeah, maybe that's part of the question too. How long has it been standardized, and why did it get to be standardized in the first place too?
And it's probably still evolving. Although I think the evolution of these things definitely slows down the more widely something is adopted. Probably. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. Let's take ourselves back to the caveman days, Jim.
Here we go. Caveman days.
Which is obviously not actually the caveman days. But I think that bagpipe finger work, the evolution could be traced all the way back. Well, it could probably be traced all the way back to just people bashing rocks together. Probably. But let's go all the way back to the advent of a reed that's put in a tube. Or maybe not even. You could go all the way back to a reed. So somewhere along the way, someone figured out that you could make a reed out of two things. This is a highly developed reed. It doesn't look like much.
Yeah.
But this is the result of thousands of years of human ingenuity right here.
We could be going back. Did you ever, like, when you were a kid, maybe in elementary school, take 2 blades of grass, stretch them between your hands, and blow through?
Yeah. Now, would that be a single reed or a double reed?
In that case, at least the way I did it was with 2 blades of grass.
Oh, you did
There's
it with
probably
2
a
blades?
way to do it with a single, and so maybe there's variation.
See, I remember
already.
doing it with a single, but I also remember it never worked quite well for me. So maybe
that
I
might have
needed
been
2.
the problem.
I don't know. But I also got good at this one, though. Where you make a little...
Yeah, that's solid.
You can make that little loon sound. Right?
See, I used to just fake it because I wanted to do that. So I'd go like this and I'd go, woo.
Yeah, that's what my son does. Yeah, that's what my son. There's a guy who will remain nameless that I met at boarding school. He was like amazing at that. And I was like, what? I thought I was the only guy that could do that because I had to practice really hard to get that. But interestingly, what do you do? Just throwing it out there, a little preview. What do you do if you figure out how to make this sound? What do you do next? Do you just keep making that sound forever?
No, you find ways to vary it.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know. You're going to try some different stuff because once you've achieved something, you always kind of want to fiddle with it, don't you?
It's maybe boredom, but maybe not even boredom. It's just once you figure it out, after you've done it for a while, you kind of naturally stumble into doing more stuff with it.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, in our fake history today, you can picture the advent of a reed of some kind. It goes like this. And you're like, whoa, what the hell was that? And you get all your buddies together and you're like, check out this thing. Check out this thing I discovered. And people are like, whoa, dude. Picture a time where that sound has never really been heard before.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like not a thing. It's quite
Mind-blowing.
exciting. By the way, either all the girls are going to think you're hot or maybe more realistically, like the first 10 or 11 people that figured that out probably got burned at the stake.
That's
like,
right.
Like that guy, there's something
This
wrong.
is
That
an
guy's a
unnatural
witch.
sound.
Yeah,
that's not
that guy's
right.
a sorcerer. Don't hang out with him.
This scene, by the way, I don't know about you, Andrew, but it's playing out in form of Far Side comic caveman depiction in my head for me, definitely.
Totally. So on the assumption that in some cave somewhere, the guy wasn't instantly killed for producing this blasphemous thing. We have a reed, okay? And then the reed makes a sound. But then what are you going to do? There's a couple things you're going to do naturally. I've seen this in my own life. When I give my kids my practice chanter, when they're little kids, you can sort of see that my conjecture here, my made up history is not that far off.
Yeah.
From how it really works, right? So you make a sound and temporarily you are really excited and thrilled about your ability to do this new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then before long, you're going to experiment with, what other things can this do? So this reed can do. Like if I blow soft, like I get something like that. That's kind of cool. But I can also do roller coasters. Ooh, what if I block the end?
Yes. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it though?
That's exactly what my kids have done too, though. So it's delightful that this is a universal experience.
Yeah. And then you could also try touching your tongue to it.
Yeah.
By the way, if you put your lips on different parts of it, if you put it on the top, it really tickles. Okay, so there you go. There's my reed. It's this incredible invention, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. If we stopped there, would you be satisfied?
Once we started going, I kind of just want to see where it goes. I want to keep going.
I suppose the next question maybe could be something along the lines of like, what if we make another reed that's a different size?
And then hop
Probably
back and
try
forth.
that, or yeah, and then you could do some things next to each other. But like at some point along the way, someone was like, what if we stick this reed in a longer tube, like and then it would sound like this, which
It's a
is
little different.
definitely different, right?
Although
And
actually, just imagining making up history anyway, Andrew, it probably was initially put all your fingers on the holes. That's probably the sound it was making first, right? Because it's just a tube.
that's right, exactly.
lower.
Exactly, like you'd put it in a tube and it would be like,
You're like, whoa, that's way different.
right, it's a way different sound. And then maybe you would try setting up different ones in different size tubes. Like, what if I put this in the mouthpiece? Woo! There, we got that one, and then we got this one, and then we have this one. This could be like centuries of entertainment.
Yeah. People are gathering around to hear this guy with his tubes.
The other thing, if I were to take this reed and put it in, this tube is a little bit different. This might actually be closer to the original tube, maybe. So we put it in there. And then I could make adjustments to the opening at the end of this tube. And that makes sounds that are way different than what I had before, right?
It's putting me in mind of that Greek aulos thing right away, too, where it's like, oh, what if you get two tubes and blow both of them at the same time?
Anyway, you could horse around in that regard, too. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. I'm getting a little carried away here, Jim. But you can
Proof
see
that
how,
it's
like,
fun. Proof that it's fun.
But anyway, at some point, someone was like, well, I have this tube, okay? And maybe you've even realized that depending on the tube, the sound is different, right? So next question would be, is there a way to change the tube so that I can get more than one sound out of it? Maybe you could think of someone maybe wondering that. And so what could you do to change the tube?
Maybe drill a hole in it.
You could drill a hole, or you could put two tubes together and you could slide them, like a trombone or something. But yeah, at some point along the way, someone realized that you could put a hole in a tube and then you could cover and uncover the hole. Now, if the hole wasn't there, like when my kids had the chanter, if the hole wasn't there, they probably never would have done anything.
Right.
But because the hole is there, they're curious and they want to cover and uncover the hole. I don't know. Pretty cool music, right?
What if
now,
also,
you might be thinking that's really stupid sounding, but think of it from the perspective of what you had before.
which was nothing, and then just the reed, and then just the reed in the tube.
Yeah, so
It's
compared
exciting.
to nothing, so compared to what you had before, which was just one sound that you could do, now you have two. And it really, once you figure out that the whole is a really interesting possibility, what are you going to do at that point? Right? What are you going to do? And by you, I don't mean maybe this isn't just one individual, but maybe it's,
Sure.
maybe it's a group of people who are kind of having fun with this silly thing, right? But you could do this. How long is it before you start thinking about like, okay, well, if I can do it with one finger, why couldn't I do it with several?
Yeah, do more holes.
So we can sort of see how a reed stuck in a tube with enough holes for each finger, we can see how that would evolve naturally, just out of the most basic type of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making sense so far?
Totally making sense.
Yeah.
I also love to imagine the possible eventuality of you go to sleep having played your tube and reed all night, and when you wake up in the morning, a beetle has bored its way through a part of the tube. And then you're like, oh
maybe
no,
it was
my tube is
accidental.
ruined.
Yeah, maybe it was accidental discovery of the whole
Yeah,
thing.
and then you realize, oh, actually, this is cool.
Yeah, it might be accidental, but I think I prefer the idea that it's not.
I heard, I don't know if this is like a legit Aboriginal story, but I heard a story back in high school when I was really into didgeridoo that supposedly was like a pourquoi story from Australia that was like, there was this dude crossing the desert and it got dark and it was getting really cold and he was freaking out. And so he started trying to build a fire so he wouldn't get too cold. And he grabbed a eucalyptus branch and threw it on the fire. And then termites came streaming out of it because they were living inside of it. And he didn't want the termites to burn. So he grabbed it out of the fire, burning his hand to save these termites. And they're inside and they're still burning. And so he blows on the end of the eucalyptus branch to blow the termites out to save them.
Why did he want to save the termites?
He just felt bad for him. He didn't want him to die. And so he blows
This
them
seems
out.
like, by the way, that I call because if you're like starving to death and about to freeze in the middle of the desert, you're not worried about termites.
I don't know if he was starving, but he was cold. That's why he was building the fire.
Yeah,
but
like you're about to die, you're not worried about termites.
Maybe he's just more evolved, cared
No.
about termites.
I'm not sure that's what more evolved is, Jim. But anyway,
But-
carry on.
So the story is then that the termites come streaming out, and either because they're on fire or because they're just grateful or both, they fly up into the night sky and become the stars. So now it's not so dark anymore at night. And
Jim, the annoying
he's
me.
discovered the first didgeridoo, and that's where the didgeridoo came from and where the stars came from.
Jim, didgeridooers worldwide. I think you can come up with a better explanation.
I wish the didgeridoo hanging behind me was a legit eucalyptus. That's just PVC pipe. So
Yeah.
not nearly as fun a story behind how the PVC didgeridoo came to be. But
Although it could be, PVC is a direct descendant. It's like polypinko bagpipes.
yeah.
You know? But anyway,
I'm just saying maybe it was bugs in every
Jim, we're trying to come up
situation.
with good
It might
explanations
all
here
be
today.
thanks to bugs.
we're trying to come up with good explanations and not that obviously weird one.
You're going to have the entire didgeridoo community after you,
Mm.
Andrew.
I mean, it would make more sense if eucalyptus, when burned, was highly hallucinogenic, and then you could make the leap with me. The termites, man, they were grateful. So they flew up into the sky.
I
Made the
like that
stars.
story, Andrew Douglas. I like it.
Anyway, we're just gonna
That's
have to
the end of
agree
the
to disagree.
episode, I guess. I brought it to a screeching halt.
What I like, so back to what I was talking about, Jim, which was something that makes complete sense based on the idea that humans like to be creative and trial and error different things.
Yeah, so they ended up with multiple holes in their stick.
It doesn't require any termites to be grateful to get to where we are so far.
But there might have been grateful termites at
There
some
might have
point.
been.
We don't know that there weren't.
We don't know that there weren't. Where were we? We
What-
have different notes, right? And then we
Yeah.
have different holes we could drill, and we have different fingers we could use, right? And so on. Okay, cool. You could sort of see how we started to develop the holed tube. And in music, there's lots of tubes with holes in them.
So many holed tubes. That is true.
A lot of holed tubes. By the way, a string instrument, like a guitar, you could picture it evolving in a similar way, right? Oh, when a string is tight and I kind of give it that plucky thing, it makes a really cool thing. And then you could change the length of the string.
I've heard people say before that any culture that develops archery soon thereafter develops a harp-like instrument.
Oh yeah, that's a cool idea. By the way, that doesn't require any termites to be grateful. So,
But
I'm
there
okay with
might
that.
have been, you don't know that there weren't. There maybe were.
I'm pretty sure there's no such thing as a grateful termite. But I'm not 100% sure.
They
But I'm
flew into
pretty
outer
darn
space, Andrew, so you wouldn't have met one, would you?
Well, there's that. That's just it has to be falsifiable in order to be a worthy explanation.
Hmm.
Like you got to show me a grateful termite, Jim.
All I can
Anyway.
say is to each their own.
Okay, where were we? Yes.
The Grateful
Uh,
Termite Hill is the one I'm going to die on, Andrew.
Yeah. What's the obvious problem, Jim? What's one of the huge problems with playing a holed tube? You're
Yeah.
a holed tube player.
Yeah.
What's the obvious problem with playing a holed tube?
For me, the obvious problem is that you have to take a breath. And once you start jamming, you don't want to stop, but you've got to breathe.
You got to breathe somehow. And so there's different possible solutions to this. But someone somewhere along the way was like, what if I hook up some sort of bag? I don't know what kind of bags you would use back in the caveman days, but
I've got guesses.
Jim, without going crazy, what are some of your guesses?
I have personally witnessed the butchering of multiple animals, of all of which have lungs, and you can pull a lung out of a body and blow it up. There are
That's-
other
that's
parts of
great.
the body too that can do that, but lungs
great to
seem
think
like
about,
really
Jim.
obvious to me.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that.
And
imagery.
there were some termites.
No.
near-
But yeah, so basically any sort of watertight container is probably also airtight. I don't know, maybe. But
Yeah.
anyway, at some point, the function of the bag hooked up to the pipes is probably something that somewhere along the way someone decided to do. It would probably have been someone who had an interest in music. Maybe they had a little reed tube that they carried around with them. But then they also had some sort of flexible bag involved in their life. Maybe they carried water with it, or I don't know. What else would you do with a tight bag back in the caveman days? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, liquid does come to mind for sure, but I guess you got to
like
carry
you're
all kinds of
storing
things.
water.
Yeah.
So like something having to do with like filling water.
Maybe
That
it was like
makes-
an important person was like, once the beat drops, I don't want it to stop. If you stop, I will kill you. And so then they were like, okay, I got to figure out some way to keep the music going forever.
Yeah, but it's probably a marriage of two ideas that somebody had. There's no fairy princess that came down from the sky Probably. Maybe there was. Like to
Yeah.
Jim's point, anything's
saying.
possible, however extremely unlikely it is. There probably wasn't. It was probably some guy who had expertise in two very interesting areas with
Speaking
a
to the value of cross training, right?
well, yeah, a
Yeah.
variance, absolutely. Like variance is so important because it helps different ideas to meet. It's like
Yeah.
it's like speed dating for
Of
various types of
ideas.
ideas.
I
Yeah,
like
man.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But anyway, someone was like, huh, I got this bag here and I know it can hold air and I've got this tube here. And my problem on the tube is I'm always running out of air. What if I connected the two? This is a leap that kind of makes sense, right? For me, and again, this is all imaginary, but for me, I could totally see that happening. And then it's okay, I hook my thing up with air and I can actually get that thing to operate my reed. So why don't I hook another tube up to it so I can continually feed the bag with air and then it can continually feed the reed with air.
Yeah.
And then that starts to become very interesting, although a new set of problems emerges from that. Jim, what's the problem now with continuous airflow to a reed that's hooked up to a bag? You're also an expert in these matters.
Yeah, the continuousness of it, that is what you want, but it's also becomes its own problem. Because, like, how do you distinguish from one noise to the next?
That's right. So the next problem is sort of the opposite problem, which is now I can never stop the air, or at least it's extremely labor intensive
I mean,
to
you
stop and start the air.
it's probably highly likely that you would have already developed like a kind of like use your tongue to stop it kind of thing, and rhythm would have become
Yeah,
part of what you
exactly.
were doing.
Like
So you put the bag on, that's gone out the window now. Yeah.
I can, if I have direct access with my mouth to my reeded tube, articulation is very possible. And by the way, articulation is not just a luxury, it's a necessity. Anytime there's two of the same note in a row that we want in a melody, we need to be able to separate that in some way. But once you hook the bag up to the instrument, you're going to have that problem. But anyway, I want to table that for now. So we now have a new problem with the bag, which is now I can never stop the air. So what's a bigger problem? Having to breathe sometimes or never being able to stop the air? Jim, in your opinion, what's the bigger problem?
I think the bigger problem is having to breathe sometimes. So once I have the bag, I don't
See,
want to
I
get rid of
actually,
the bag.
call me crazy, Jim. I'm going to disagree with you on that.
Well, me and the termites are going to go ahead and call you crazy.
That is a problem, but in my opinion, I can live with that problem. When I hook the bag up to it, it's not actually particularly practical at all. Relative to like the two problems actually don't stack up in the long run. So being able to articulate easily with my mouth is far more important than never having to breathe.
Maybe proof that you're right is the fact that there aren't a ton of instruments with bags attached to them even today.
I don't think it's proof. I don't think there would be proof that I'm right, but I think that's right. I think there's a huge prevalence of mouth articulated tubed instruments. And there's a relatively small subset of continuous airflow instruments where you're fed by a bag. Like there's way fewer instruments. That's what makes the bagpipe unique. So I think that was probably ultimately discovered. It's like, hey, like your idea to hook the bag up to this tube is only mildly interesting. And it's not actually particularly useful in creating the melodies that we want to create. Like presumably there were already songs and stuff existing in these.
Yeah, there was
different
probably
cultures.
a repertoire, and they wanted to play the greatest hits, and suddenly they couldn't.
Right. And so with the bag, you're not playing the greatest hits. Or maybe you are, but maybe they're not quite as good. And then certainly it's more logistics. So don't forget,
that's for sure.
Don't forget one reed, one tube with a couple holes. That's way easier to set up and get going than now a reed, a tube, a bag, another tube that goes into the bag. And then does the bag always hold air? Anyone that plays bagpipes will know it's kind of a pain in the ass. And that's like machined bags. It can still be a pain in the butt to get the bag to hold air on a regular basis. And so the logistics are also amplified with this bag. However, there's one extremely important thing that being hooked into a bag allows you to do, which is maybe possible without the bag, but way less doable. Because what are you thinking? So now I got my blowpipe going into my bag thing. I got my tubey thing coming out. I can play music continuously. But what's one of the next creative thoughts that's naturally going to come to mind once you have that rig set up?
I think similar to how you go from having one hole in your tube to then going, what if I added more holes? You pretty quickly make the leap to, what if I put more reed sticks into this bag?
Yeah, exactly. So you could do that, and then you could use one hand for one tube and one hand for another tube. That's one possibility. And by the way, I've seen stuff like that before.
Yeah, that's a thing. For
Yeah,
sure.
it's a thing. But you probably come to the conclusion at some point that with only one hand, the types of music you could produce on one tube or the other is limited. Like you could think of each hole you add, you are adding an exponentially greater number of things you could do with each hole you add to a tube.
Yeah, it's like each one is a doubling,
That's
or
right. Each one is
maybe
a
even more
doubling.
than that. I don't know what the math is, but yeah, it's a lot.
Exactly. So each one is a doubling of the musical possibilities. So with one hand, you're way, 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 way less possibilities than if you have two. So that we have a singular tube that we use with our hands. But then we can set up other tubes to play sort of like backing drone type sounds. And so a drone style tube coming out of the bagpipe is kind of interesting. Interesting for a couple different reasons. Number one is it gives you a second sound. The interplay of those harmonic intervals is something you never would have had before, at least if you were playing by yourself, and now you have constantly. And then we start to explore all the different possible harmonic intervals, like the sound of my low A, which I'm sure it was definitely not called a low A, but your bass note, get perfectly in tune with the drone is cool. But then if you could, eventually you'd figure out that a double long tube gives you a very similar note that's like very rich and interesting, and there's probably different notes you could do in between. And by
I
the way,
believe that was Pythagoras with his anvils, figuring out that double size is double interval thing.
Yeah, my guess is that it was already known, and Pythagoras found the explanation,
which
right?
was demons.
Which was demons. Yeah, maybe.
Which actually, Andrew, important to note that every step along this imagined development, people probably were burned at the figurative stake.
I know.
Every
Well,
time
that's
they
not
added
necessarily true. Wasn't Pythagoras was a Greek, right?
I think he was Greek. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Greeks had it going on. They had a very non-static society with a culture of criticism. And so it's not a coincidence that Pythagoras emerged from that. But anyway, yeah, you're right. But also very gradual improvement, one step at a time. I feel like historically, maybe you were able to get away with that fairly often. It's like where you make several leaps and it challenges the status quo. That's where you tend to get in trouble. But anyway, but yeah, these are all one thing at a time. But I guess my point to people is that like, you can sort of conceptually, I mean, obviously I'm making all this up, right? But you can conceptually visualize how via one step at a time, we might arrive where we are today.
Yeah.
And it's worth thinking about. So anyway, so far we have a reeded tube thing with some drones. We can see how we've gotten there. And then the next question might be exactly how do we arrange our holes? And I suppose applicable to the initial discussion here is like, how do we get to the finger work today? So we'll go back to the tube now. Okay, we're talking about the reeded tube and we're trying to play melodies. So what's the problem? If you cannot directly access the reed with your mouth, what's the problem that we have if I wanted to play a melody? For example, let's pretend Twinkle Little Star is a melody in our culture that I want to play, but that has a lot of repeated notes in it, right? That's the problem. So how do you repeat a note when air is being sent through continuously through a reed? By the way, this is the separation, right? What we're talking about here is the separation between typical Western music theory and bagpipe theory. This is a key separation. This is one of the key reasons that people who have played another instrument like a clarinet, when they try to learn the bagpipes, this is one of the key points that you have to understand, the articulation problem. With a clarinet, we have mouth access to the reed, but with the bagpipe, we do not. And then are there any other typical Western instruments that have the articulation problem that the bagpipers do?
I don't
Can you think
so.
of any?
No, because wind instruments, you're pretty much always going to have mouth access. String instruments, you're plucking or bowing. And I mean, in percussion, you're hitting or you're not hitting.
That's right.
And that
You're
pretty
hitting or
much
you're not
covers
hitting.
everything, right? So,
Exactly. So the bag is the key difference here. Other than that, it's all basically the same. We had to branch off from an epistemological, from a musico-epistemological standpoint. We had to branch off here because we have different needs now. We can never stop the flow of air. So now the issue becomes, how are we going to separate notes? It's going to be a big issue.
yeah.
First of all, we're never going to have any rests. It's possible to start and stop the chanter, right? But it's extremely labor intensive. It's extremely difficult, and it's extremely slow, right? So you can start and stop sound if you have mouth access very quickly and easily. You can quickly separate notes and articulate things with your tongue and other mouth movements. But with the bagpipe, that's never going to be a thing. So we can never rest, which is awkward. Beethoven's not going to include you in the symphonies because you can never be quiet and you have one volume.
Yeah.
But how have we worked around the articulation problem?
I think there's generally two approaches. One you can see in like Northumbrian and Uilleann pipes, where like you close your chanter off so that you have this option to stop the air just to that. Like drones will keep going, of course, right? But you can do it. You can stop the air because the bottom of your chanter can be closed off. The other approach, of course, is what Highland pipes do. And I wonder if that has to do with standing up and walking around to play.
Maybe. I think it might also just have to do with logistics.
Mm.
Not just standing up and walking around, but usually the simplest path to the goal, the path of least resistance, is the one you're going to take. So you're talking about when you can use like your leg or something, you can press the thing against your leg to stop.
Yeah, or you can manufacture it to have a closed bottom, and that's just like a different way of approaching it. But obviously with Highland pipes, it's like blips and bloops. That's how we do it.
Well, one way to solve the articulation problem would be to completely close off the tube. But what if you're playing a higher note that requires several fingers to be open at the same time? How do they do that, Jim? I actually don't really know.
Oh, it's just the bottom of the tube is closed off. So if all fingers are down, then there's no air flowing.
Right.
But then as soon as any hole is open, air flows through those holes rather than...
Right. Yeah. So the default position there is everything closed.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing, which by the way, I think probably occurs to you a lot sooner and faster and easier with less creativity, which is if I want to separate a note, I could just spank it.
That's it. Spank it. Yeah, this doesn't require re-engineering your reed tube. Your reed tube is as it is if you just, as you say, spank it.
So here I go. I want two notes, but I can't get it because the air is continuous. What if I just spank it? By the way, I probably wouldn't be doing that. I'd probably still be in the open fingering, probably. But spanking it is a good way to separate notes. And it's not that far of a leap. It's like, I have to do something, so let's just try a finger wiggle.
Mm-hmm. A finger wiggle, a spank. I like it. Yeah. Well, how many other funny names can we come up with for what that is?
And my conjecture is that strikes were the first form of grace notes.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think was it striking first, or was it grace noting, like G grace note first?
It must be striking, because what would you do? And by the way, you can sort of see your kids do it too.
Yeah, that's true.
You're going to start by hitting down on it.
Yeah, that's a pretty intuitive thing to do. I think that seems like a solid guess.
Yeah, strikes are pretty cool, and they're extremely effective for separating notes.
I heard a story once, though, that there was a guy playing his reed tube, and as he's playing along, he didn't realize that there was a termite inside of his reed tube.
Jim, son of a...
And as it climbed out, he tried to swat it to get it off.
Right, yeah.
And it jumped out of the way. But he hit the hole instead, and he went, whoa. And he was so grateful to the termite. So then humans were grateful to termites. That's the story that I heard.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty crap story. But anyway, so we can see where strikes might come from. However, nowadays we have grace notes primarily that come from above the note and involve singular fingers. Right?
Do you think we figured that out because of liking how it sounded? Or I guess it could be more than one factor that goes into why that would happen, but I wonder why that happens.
Yeah, I have a couple of ideas. So for here, maybe the exact path gets a little bit interesting. Okay, but first of all, I think the question inevitably comes once we're doing strikes, and we're doing strikes when we need them to separate notes, right? Mm-hmm. But inevitably, I think the thought process would come, what if I used a strike or other motion like that when I didn't need it, but if it could enhance the music in some way?
Yeah, just because I like it.
So instead of a grace note of necessity, maybe you like it, Jim, or maybe you want to get the attention of the girl.
So maybe your audience likes it.
Exactly. Or it could increase your overall status as a musician if you could do things that are fancier than your competition.
Yeah, so-and-so is only doing these out of necessity, but I'm going to do two of them in a row just as a flourish.
Yeah, and that might sound made up and stupid, except for if you give both of your kids a chanter, what do they start doing instantly? Instantly. It doesn't
competing.
They instantly, anything new that you give two kids, if you give two kids the exact same thing, anytime, the one-upsmanship begins almost immediately. The most predictable human behavior ever. Give two kids two identical objects and watch what happens.
It's fun too that part of that is that anything that either of them figures out, the other one is watching. They're both watching each other.
Of course.
And so they're going to observe it, learn it, and iterate on it just like right away.
And it's tempting to say that's annoying behavior, but it's actually creativity at work, man. And Is competition always bad? I'm not sure. But yeah, and then sometimes you're doing it out of excitement. Sometimes you're doing it for the attention of, like you said, Jim, for the attention of an audience. But it might just be fascination, and it might just be play. It might just be what we do. I'm not quite sure. So using strikes and other like finger motions to alter the sound, that's going to grow in complexity and use. And you're not only going to use it when you need it, you're going to use it when you want it.
Yeah.
For example, like the internet. When the internet started, we used it for things we needed. Like
I had a reason to sit down and log on.
Yeah. Now, what do we use the internet for? We use the internet for everything now.
Yeah. Use it when we shouldn't.
Right. And AI is the same thing. I find myself regularly just having fun conversations with AI that completely
Just
have no point whatsoever.
What up, bro?
Yeah. Hey, how you doing today? I haven't talked to you in a while. And then you're like, wait, I'm just talking to a machine. That's
and the open AI guy is over there ripping his hair out. You're wasting so much energy saying please and thank you.
Sidebar, is that a waste or not?
I mean, that's how you figure stuff out, right?
Yes. And the more play we can do with those things, the better off everyone's going to be. But I digress. That's just what this optimist here in Troy, New York thinks, Jim. You're busy coming up with reasons that the termites are going to,
we all have our little hobbies, don't we?
Some people are just termite people. So anyway, we come up with grace notes of luxury rather than grace notes of necessity, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to what degree too, Andrew, do you think that part of our G grace note fascination is just that the index finger is really easy to move? Like
that's right.
We're really good at moving it.
I think we're getting there. I was going to get there. Thank you for ruining
Sorry, I didn't mean to hop ahead.
No, I'm just kidding. You didn't ruin it. You just made it significantly worse, but it's not ruined. So anyway, we're going to start wiggling other fingers. And then, yes, I think the reason the G grace note is so common, it makes common sense. You can see how we got there. First of all, the trigger finger is extremely dexterous.
Yeah.
There's a reason for firearms you don't shoot with your ring finger. There's a reason.
Silly.
It's this finger is extremely dexterous, right? Way more dexterous and controllable than the other ones for some reason. Or am I biased because I played bagpipes for so long? But I'm pretty sure if you're going to pinch someone, this is the default.
Yeah, I think most people go with that. Yeah. I mean, and if you see something new or you're trying to check something out, if you watch people who haven't learned to type with all fingers, it's always the index fingers that you go for if you've got that option. So I think
okay, good. Nice. I like that. That's supporting evidence. I mean, we don't know for sure, but it's supporting evidence. And so it's extremely dexterous, right? But what is also true about the G grace note finger?
It's at the top of that row.
Yeah. So the thumb would be the highest of all fingers, but this one's the second highest. It's extremely dexterous, and you can play one on any note of the scale almost. And right? It makes sense.
I kind of suspect, too, that the high A hole might have been a late addition to the stick.
Could have been.
Just because it kind of makes sense, like to me at least, if I had a hole, I just keep making the row.
And what are thumbs used for generally out in the world? For example,
just letting people know that you're okay.
Well, what's my thumb being used for here? Now it's opposable.
To grab stuff.
Thumbs are opposable, and that's cool. And thumbs are like the most capable of all our fingers. Okay, but like by default, our thumb is our grabber thingy. It's our grabber.
Our grabber thingy. Nice.
That's what it is, right? So like without my thumb, I would be screwed here.
It's also how emperors decide if gladiators are going to die.
Yeah, this is extremely unstable.
Ooh, tricky.
Right? With my thumb, it's much easier to grab. So our thumb is primarily what we're going to use to grip the chanter.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I also think that's why when people play a high A, I think that's why people tend to have that huge surge on the high A. It's because you have to let go of your grabber thingy.
Yeah.
And it's a weird feeling.
That's a good point.
That's my best guess about why it happens so universally for everybody.
That's really interesting.
So the G grace note finger, that's going to be our primary grace note forever because it's the number one most useful finger. The thumb would be a good one to try, but it wouldn't be nearly as like that pinchy motion that we have, right? That pinch motion is so universal and so handy. And by the way, it's so practical in the sense of your tube because it's so high up and can do that on so many notes. Oh, and the other one is, of all of the practical fingers we could use, that also has the highest pitch. So it has the most accentive quality to it as well.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
For example,
really stand out.
I won't give you any other cues, but where's the beat? You never, ever, no one, ever is going to say that the D or the E grace note is the beat.
Right.
Because that little chirp, that high-pitched chirp is naturally the most accentive one. So we can see how the G grace note becomes the pivotal grace note for bagpipers.
Yeah, that's how when you have a metronome that differentiates the downbeat from the other beats, it's always higher. Ding, 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 ding. That
Yes.
seems to just be the natural thing.
Exactly. So we would gravitate towards that. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So that G grace note becomes the one. And then when we're not playing a G grace note, like what would we do next? After we've used a G grace note, we want to use something else, right? Because in order to play with more speed and complexity, right? In order to do things quickly, we're going to need to incorporate other fingers. So what would you use next? It seems pretty obvious to me.
I think probably your other pointy finger.
Exactly. I would use my other pincher finger.
Yeah.
By default, that's exactly what bagpipers do. So the G grace note comes first, the D grace note comes next. But it doesn't happen that way because someone decreed it and it was not delivered to us by any termites or their masters. It just wasn't, Jim. It's like my point is that these ideas evolve and are tested over time, and we kind of arrive at these things as the best possible way of doing things.
So the GDE is like a time capsule of, it's like a compressed timeline
That's
of
right.
how bagpipe embellishments came to be.
Yes, and our grace note system, so the way people play grace notes now and write them out, it's not a code that says exactly how it's supposed to be. It's a system that is pretty exactly applied by every great piper I can think of, both when they're playing material and when they're creating new material, right? If someone writes a new tune, one of the reasons I can learn a tune very quickly is that I don't have to learn what grace notes to use.
Because you're so familiar with the system.
Sure. And maybe I would come up with something different. If I'm learning a new Chris Armstrong tune, it's like, okay, maybe if it were left up to me, I would come up with something slightly different, but it would only be ever so slightly different. And then that makes it something that we all understand. And I think if you look at some of the older composers, you can see how the grace note system wasn't quite as fully developed yet. However, the basics were already in place, like the G grace note and so on.
I remember taking a music theory class where we took a quiz, and the question on the quiz was something like, did Bach follow the such and such Baroque system rules when composing, something like that?
Yes.
And I'd answered yes, but the correct answer was no. The correct answer being no because this system of rules was developed post-Bach, partly based on what Bach had done.
And it's all made up and it's all theoretical.
Yeah, and it's all made up. But the teacher did end up giving me the point because afterward I explained that like my thinking had been obviously Bach was consistent because that's why we're able to extrapolate some kind of system of rules from what Bach was doing.
Yes.
And I'm not here, I don't bring that up to be like, look how smart I am. Rather just to say like, it feels reminiscent of that idea that like the bagpipe system of embellishments develops naturally. Obviously, there's something consistent there because you can get a sense for it just by playing bagpipes for enough years. You don't have to formally be told, here's what we do.
Exactly.
So that
well,
can,
I only
can accelerate stuff.
I've only come up with this just because I'm a teacher and it's sort of my job to think about these things. But most
and you
people
didn't even know
understand
about
it
the termites.
Intuitively. And I didn't even know about the termites.
And
But it's
you've made
something
it
that
this
we
far.
all learn intuitively. So we all intuitively know the grace note system. We all just know it.
Yeah.
Because after you've played enough tunes, your brain figures it out. It doesn't really need you to consciously recognize what's going on. Your brain figures it out. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with how we operate in the world and how we interact with each other. And a lot of it is because it really makes sense. It really is the best way of doing things. Now, over time, things will change. I actually think that things are already changing, not so much in the direction of complexity, but in the other direction. I think bagpipe music, this is just me. It's just what I think. But I think bagpipe music, the grace noting is in the middle of a decomplexifying stage.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's not something that anyone is planning. This is completely decentralized. But people are realizing that the overdoing of grace noting and of embellishment in tunes is really holding back the potential. And so we're actually seeing a simplification going on very gradually.
I'm not trying to say that I'm a barometer for this change, Andrew, but it's so interesting that you mentioned that because it was just last week. I was during a lunch break, standing there at work, playing my pipes, playing a march that I played in high school, but playing it with just some grace notes and doublings and thinking to myself, this is nice. Have I become lazy? Or
it's easier.
Yeah, because it's not
as
how I
it should
played
be.
it
Yeah, so
before.
it's a refining. And some of Fred Morrison's tunes, they're just so beautifully, starkly grace noted. Is that the right word? Starkly?
Yeah,
like
I think
not
so.
much.
Yeah.
Like he's doing so much with so little, and it's so playable. People are starting to consider the playability of these things. The other thing, when I was a kid, 6/8 marches, right? They're just so peppered with grace notes everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've started to do naturally, and I've noticed other people doing it too, I just take out the ones that I don't need. I take out the ones that aren't really helping the musical line come along. But that's normal. Everyone's doing that. It's like more acceptable now. And it's less of a flex. And I think it might be partially because players are better now. But it's less of a flex to play a crap ton of embellishments everywhere. Weirdly, more is less.
Do you think that we as individual players might consciously or unconsciously kind of try to hide behind the complexity
Sure.
of embellishments?
Yes.
So then you don't have to be like, enjoy my music. You can be like, look how technically impressive this
Yeah.
is.
You're the guy who buys a Corvette even though he's already $50,000 in debt.
That
because,
Creme
like-
was a Corvette.
Yeah, because in the short run, it gets you status, right? Or it seems to. But then in the long run, it's the guy that drove the Pinto until it hit 400,000 miles. He's the guy who now like has all the money and the freedom and he can relax and so on. We definitely have that. We definitely have those peacock feather type
Yeah.
decisions that we can make.
I feel like I can see that in my own playing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you're tempted to make things really complicated. I certainly am.
Yeah.
Like sometimes when I'm playing a tune, I'm doing all this crazy stuff and it's like, whoa, bro. And sometimes maybe you're doing the crazy stuff because you're trying to cover up lack of control that you have in other areas, which is another ironic thing that can happen.
Yeah, like if I can't land right on the beat, I'll just do a giant grip and then you don't know where the beat was. And I'm like, yeah, I pretty much got there.
I love that. I mean, I think that's a great example. In the interest of trying to wrap this up, I think my point is that with a little bit of imagination, you can sort of derive reasonable explanations for why it is we play things the way that we do on the pipes, right? There's a reason. This all comes from something. It comes from a step-by-step process of evolution. Like we saw the split point where bagpipes kind of split off from most other Western instruments in their evolution. You can see that. But it's all just trial and error. And we don't know if the trials are purposeful or accidental. I think they're probably usually the result of some sort of purposeful action or some sort of like purposeful experimentation. But then along the way, you're going to try a million things. You're going to throw out the ones that don't make sense. Ones that do make sense will live on until a better idea comes along. And eventually, like for example, it wasn't that long ago that Cs used to be played open. High As used to be played, at least by some, like this. But for some reason, and we could get into why that might be, but for some reason, the closed C has emerged as the best explanation for how you should play a C. And this is the best explanation for how you can play a high A. But there are still some people out in the world that don't do that. They're still kind of on that other fork. And with all due respect to these folks, they're not going to last because there's so many people that are on the current branch that are wildly surpassing the capabilities of the people on the other branch. On the aggregate, I'm not saying every time, right? But unless a new school of players come out playing open Cs and Pibroch high A's that start to just dominate the hearts and minds of the entire like community, it's probably not going to happen, right?
That is an interesting thing. Like how many ideas that maybe were perfectly good ideas have popped up in the world and then disappeared because they just didn't gain enough of a following for any number of reasons.
That's exactly right. And the reasons might not always be just.
Yeah, maybe there was a better way to do it, but not enough people got on board and it's lost to time now.
If you take like the evolution of Pibroch music, right? Like basically at a certain point, it hit a huge bottleneck where Pibroch was basically just being kept alive via the competition system. But then suddenly now the constraints of the competition system have completely morphed the music used to sound like. At least it certainly seems that way. And then is that good or bad or does it matter?
Is that a spicy take, Andrew? I feel like there's some people who feel strongly the other way.
No, there's just
a hot
no
take that just happened?
like to me, there's just no way. They would be very difficult to dispute. For example, Pibroch, I think, I could be wrong, but I don't know. Here's an example. You used to be able to play it with 2 drones. The third drone, I'm pretty sure the third drone and the fact that it's completely standardized has come out of the competition system, I think. But I think it's really also well known that Pibroch used to take a variety of different forms and used to be way more artistic. Like I used to go back to the ground many times during the performance of a tune.
Can you imagine making it even longer by returning to the ground like 4 times throughout?
Well, that's the thing. But believe it or not, Pibroch has undergone extreme pressure to compress the amount of time it takes. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Like basically the people running the events were like, guys,
We can't
something
have
has to be
judges
done.
taking bathroom breaks halfway through your performance.
Well, the P-Rock competitions used to take days.
I believe it. I didn't know that, but I believe it.
I think it used to also be acceptable to retune yourself several times throughout the course of a
Wow, really?
performance. Yeah. Whereas
Wow.
now, if you did that, you'd be like disqualified.
Yeah, that's the end. Yeah.
But we still allow a 3 to 4 minute tuning time before the performance of most P-Rocks too, which is wild.
Hmm.
But I suppose it's probably still undergoing some evolution.
I mean, probably it will forever, right? Sometimes maybe it slows to the point of looking like Frozen, but hopefully everything's always moving.
Who knows? No one can tell what's going to happen next.
Yeah, that's part of what's
Right.
exciting about being around.
Yeah. Like, for example, it's obvious, right? It's obvious. We need to get rid of the tuning time before solo competitions. It's obvious. It's so obvious. But it's not. It's not
Is
obvious.
it also obvious that we need to standardize to B flat?
That's one of the things I'd love to see.
Yeah.
And it seems like an obvious thing, but it's not obvious. And it's probably
Yeah.
never going to happen. Or it may or may not happen. Or it might happen in combination with something else.
Hmm.
Or, yeah. Or people might stop playing bagpipes altogether because electronic technology has actually become better. Like, who knows? We don't know what's
Hmm.
going to happen.
Yeah.
Anything could happen. North America could take over the world of like we could form our own branch of bagpiping, not on purpose, just accidentally. We could accidentally combine classic Great Highland bagpipe skills with the theremin community.
Hey, why not?
And for whatever reason, it just captures everyone's hearts and minds,
It's the
and
new
like-
electric guitar.
and it morphs off into its completely own thing. Yeah.
I can tell you this much, Andrew. Whatever does happen, termites will be involved.
Termites will be involved. No, they won't. I hope not. I mean, termites destroy structures.
Do they destroy or do they create something new out of what was there before?
Wow, Jim. This is a whole new side of you. I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with that. But anyway, did this episode have a point?
I mean,
There
I know-
was an hour of waffling. Oh, it's sort of like how ideas might evolve.
Yeah.
And then through the elimination of error, Jim, we've
Mhm.
arrived at how we do the things that we do.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk about this for another hour.
And we should.
It'd be nice to do a sequel where we could talk about some of the key tunes and stuff. Like, why do we think they became such huge hits? What do they do to distinguish themselves amongst all the other tunes that we play?
Yeah. That would be really fun. Maybe we can have a chat going because I maybe would have some ideas, but probably not as many as you. And I wonder if some of our ideas would overlap and thereby be like, okay, this is definitely an example then if we both thought of that tune, that kind of thing.
For sure. Like for me, it's like Clumsy Lover. Got to put that
Yeah.
in there.
That would have been the first thing I suggested. Yeah, for sure.
Steam Train to Maleg for me. That's a big one.
I might have said Hellbound Train for the same reason. Which one
Oh,
came
yeah.
out first?
I think Steam Train, but I'm not sure. But even Hellbound Train, I mean, it blows your mind to smithereens.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not that much of a leap. Like there's a
It-
couple knobs that got turned there, a couple knobs that got turned that were a little bit different from what you would expect. And then suddenly your mind blows up into a million pieces.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we could do a follow-up episode.
Yeah. I think it'd be fun.
Meanwhile, I'm just thinking about termites.
Every
at
time
that.
you look at the stars in the sky, Andrew, I want you to remember. Thank you, termites.
No.
Hey everybody, Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.